Before Isaac Newton changed the way humanity understood the universe, he disappeared. Not metaphorically, not gradually. He physically removed himself from society, from his colleagues, from every distraction the world could offer, and he vanished into 18 months of complete, deliberate, almost savage isolation. No letters, no socializing, no obligations. Just Newton, his notebooks, and a silence so total that the people who knew him assumed he had lost his mind. When he emerged from that silence, he had invented calculus, formulated the laws of motion, and cracked the theory of gravity. 18 months. The entire foundation of modern physics. Darwin did the same thing before on the origin of species. Tesla did it before his greatest inventions. Einstein disappeared from the academic social world before special relativity. Carl Jung called it his confrontation with the unconscious. Dostoevsky did it before writing his masterpieces. Michelangelo spent 4 years on his back alone on a scaffold before the Sistine Chapel existed. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. A documented, repeatable, almost universal pattern in the lives of people who produced work that changed the world. And the mechanism behind it, the actual psychological and neurological reason why disappearing precedes greatness, is something nobody is talking about clearly. Because it is uncomfortable. Because it means that everything modern culture tells you about productivity, networking, staying visible, building your brand, staying connected, all of it is, for the purposes of doing your most important work, precisely wrong. Let me show you what they actually did. Call it what you want. Monk mode. Deep isolation. The disappearance method. The name is modern. The practice is ancient. And it works for one reason that most people will resist when they first hear it. Your brain cannot do two things at once. Not two big things. Not two important things. Not thinking deeply and managing social obligations simultaneously. It can simulate doing two things. It can switch rapidly between them. But what that switching costs you is not obvious, and it is not small. Psychologists call it attention residue. When you switch from one task to another, a portion of your cognitive resources remains stuck on the previous task. It lingers. It does not fully release. So when you are trying to think deeply about a hard problem and you also have unread messages, pending replies, social obligations, and the ambient awareness of what other people think of you, your brain is not actually present with the hard problem. It is managing the hard problem and the social world simultaneously. And deep creative work, the kind that Newton was doing, the kind that Darwin was doing, does not tolerate that split. The work demands everything. It demands the kind of focused attention that can only exist when there is nothing else competing for it. No social performance, no status management, no ambient noise of other people's expectations. Just the problem and the mind and time. This is what the disappearance method actually provides. Not inspiration, not mystical solitude, not romanticized suffering. It provides the complete elimination of attention residue so that the full processing power of the human brain can be directed at a single target for a sustained period. That is it. That is the mechanism. It is unglamorous, and it is devastating, and it is completely consistent with every documented case of extraordinary intellectual or creative output in human history. Now let me give you the cases because the pattern across them is so consistent it borders on eerie. Isaac Newton. The Black Plague of 1665 forced Cambridge to close. Newton returned home to Woolsthorpe Manor. He was 23 years old. What followed was what historians call his annus mirabilis, his miraculous year, though it actually stretched to 18 months. In that period, working alone, Newton developed the foundations of what would become calculus, established the law of universal gravitation, and did the foundational work on his theory of light and color. He later described this period as the most productive of his life. He was not at Cambridge surrounded by scholars and debate and social stimulation. He was at his mother's house, alone, thinking. Charles Darwin. After returning from the voyage of the Beagle in 1836, Darwin sat on his theory of natural selection for more than 20 years before publishing it. But the productive core of his work, the period when he was truly developing the theory, testing it, refining it, was marked by deliberate social withdrawal. Darwin was chronically ill and used his illness strategically to limit social obligation. He worked from down house in Kent in isolation, with a structured daily routine that left no room for social performance. He saw few people. He answered letters but guarded his thinking time ferociously. He called social engagements great wasters of time. He meant it. The origin of species was the product not of collaboration and networking and staying visible. It was the product of a man who systematically removed himself from everything that wasn't the work. Nikola Tesla. The mythology around Tesla tends to obscure his actual working methods, but what's documented is that his most productive periods were periods of extreme isolation. Tesla would enter states of mental absorption that lasted days. He would stop eating. He would stop sleeping in any conventional sense. He would pace his laboratory alone. His colleagues learned not to interrupt him. His social relationships, such as they were, existed on his terms and largely outside his working periods. The inventions came from the solitude. The solitude was not a side effect of Tesla's eccentricity, it was the method. Albert Einstein. Before publishing the special theory of relativity in 1905, Einstein was working as a patent clerk in Bern, deliberately isolated from the academic establishment. He had not been able to get a university position. This was, and you need to sit with this, a gift. He was freed from the social obligations and intellectual conformity of academic life. He could think without the constant noise of what his colleagues expected of him, what journals wanted from him, what academic reputation required of him. His 1905 papers, not just special relativity, but the photoelectric effect paper that would win him the Nobel Prize, emerged from this period of enforced outsider isolation. When he later became famous and embedded in the academic establishment, the nature of his work changed. He produced less. He spent enormous energy on debates and lectures and social performance. The wild period, the genius period, was the patent clerk period. The isolation period. The pattern is not subtle, but here is the part nobody tells you. It was not comfortable. Every account of these disappearances, every memoir, every biography, every letter written during the period of isolation, describes something that the people living through it often experienced as close to unbearable. Newton described periods of intense anxiety and what we would today recognize as obsessive thought patterns. Darwin's illness, which he never fully understood, included symptoms that modern researchers increasingly believe were psychosomatic, his body manifesting the stress of the intellectual work he was forcing himself through. Tesla was, by any clinical measure, not a stable person. Einstein's first marriage collapsed during his most productive period, partly because the depth of his absorption left almost nothing for anyone around him. The disappearance method is not a productivity hack. It is not a lifestyle trend. It is not something you do for a few weeks to feel disciplined. It is a choice to prioritize the work above everything else, above comfort, above social belonging, above the ordinary pleasures and obligations of a connected life. For long enough that the work has the space to become what it needs to become. That is difficult. It is supposed to be difficult. The difficulty is not a bug. The difficulty is the filter. It is the reason most people who attempt deep work do not sustain it. Not because they are not capable of the thinking, but because they are not willing to pay the social and psychological cost of the isolation that makes the thinking possible. Let's talk about what modern life does to this. The average person in 2025 checks their phone 150 times per day. They switch tasks every 3 to 5 minutes on average. They are never more than a few minutes away from social feedback, from likes, replies, messages, notifications, the constant ambient pulse of what other people think and feel and want from them. What this does to the brain is not neutral. The research on this is not ambiguous. Sustained exposure to high-frequency task switching and social feedback loops literally rewires the default patterns of attention. The brain adapts to constant interruption by becoming less capable of sustained focus. Not temporarily less capable, structurally less capable. The neural pathways associated with deep concentration atrophy from disuse, the same way a muscle atrophies when it isn't used. This means that the cognitive tool that Newton, Darwin, Tesla, and Einstein relied on, the capacity for sustained, uninterrupted, single-focused deep thought, is a tool that modern life is actively degrading in most people who live it without deliberate intervention. And the intervention is precisely what it sounds like. You have to disappear. Not forever. Not dramatically. Not in a way that destroys your relationships or burns your professional life down. But genuinely, deliberately, and for long enough that your brain redevelops the capacity that the modern environment is constantly working to erode. Here is what the disappearance method actually looks like in practice, stripped of mythology. It is a defined period, weeks, months, however long the work requires, during which social obligations are minimized to the absolute essential. Not eliminated, minimized. During which your work is the first activity of every day, before your brain has been exposed to the noise of other people's priorities. During which your phone is a tool you use deliberately rather than an environment you live inside. During which the question you return to constantly, the question that structures every day is not, what do other people need from me today? But what does the work need from me today? This is uncomfortable immediately. Within the first few days of genuine isolation and deep work, the brain protests. It craves the familiar stimulation. It generates anxiety, restlessness, the strong sense that you are missing something important, falling behind, losing relevance. This is not intuition. This is withdrawal. It is the brain complaining about the removal of a stimulus it has become dependent on. Push through it. Because on the other side of it, and every account of sustained deep work confirms this, there is something that people who have experienced it describe the same way across centuries and cultures. A state of absorption so complete that time loses its ordinary texture. A quality of thinking that is simply not available at the surface level of normal daily life. A capacity to hold a problem, turn it, examine it from angles that only become visible after sustained immersion, that produces insights which feel, from the inside, almost like they came from somewhere else. Newton called it standing on the shoulders of giants. What he meant, I think, is that the solitude allowed him to go deep enough into problems that previous thinkers had touched the surface of, to go so much deeper than the surface that the full structure became visible. You cannot see the full structure of anything from the surface. You have to go down. And going down requires time and silence, and the willingness to disappear. Here is the question I want to leave you with. You know what work you are capable of. Not the work you are currently producing, the work you are capable of. The thing you have thought about in your best moments, your clearest moments, the moments when the noise quieted and something underneath became briefly visible. How long has it been since you gave that thing the silence it needs? How long has it been since you were genuinely unreachable? Not for an hour, not for an afternoon, but for long enough that your brain stopped expecting interruption and started expecting depth? Newton had 18 months. Darwin had years. You do not need years. You probably do not need months. But you need more than you are currently giving it. The greatest work of your life will not be produced in the margins of a connected, optimized, socially visible, constantly available existence. It will be produced in the silence you are afraid to choose. History's greatest men did not disappear because circumstance forced them to. They disappeared because they understood something that most people around them did not. The world rewards visibility, but the work requires disappearance. Choose which one matters more to you. Then act accordingly.